Welcome to Butt and Butt Tutorials. I am Sheshadri, faculty for Social Science. This session is for 10th CBSE and the lesson we are doing is in history. Now, dear students, you remember that we had started this lesson in our last session, Rise of Nationalism in Europe. This is part 2 of the same lesson, and this will also extend further to one more part. Now, let us recall what we did in the first part of this lesson. We saw that in 1848, Frederic Soro, a French artist, prepared a series of 4 prints visualizing a democratic world, wherein he showed flags for each and every nation, and then he was talking of a total abolition of monarchy and autocratic regimes, and a democratic and a socialist republic was what he had in mind. That was one. Then it was during the 19th century that nationalism emerged as a force, bringing a lot of political changes in Europe, mostly in Western Europe rather than in Eastern Europe, mostly in Western Europe. Now, the first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789. And when Napoleon Bonaparte led the French Revolution and then took over the ruling of France, and he conquered the other European countries, the same spirit of nationalism spread to other countries like Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. Now, let us go further and see how nationalism developed further and led to further changes in Europe. Now, this term, it was not just nationalism, it was liberal nationalism. So, what was this policy? What did liberal nationalism stand for? Now, the term liberalism derives from the Latin root liber, meaning free. So, they are basically talking of freedom to the people in all aspects: freedom of thought, freedom to own property, freedom of speech. So the basic, what we in our constitution we call as the basic human rights, that is what actually people at that point of time began fighting for. Liberalism stood for freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. It emphasized the concept of government by consent. It was not an autocratic government where some ruler comes and says, I am the state or I am the government. It had to be elected, a constitution and representative government through parliament. And again, parliament consisting of elected representatives. Now, at that point of time, please note this word, which is not included here, but it is an important word. It is called suffrage. Suffrage. Suffrage is the right to vote. Suffrage was introduced at that point of time in Europe in the early 19th century. But it again had a condition. And what was this condition? The right to vote and to get elected was given exclusively to property owning men. Now, you will see why this was not all that good condition. Men without property and all women were excluded from political rights. So there also, once the right to vote came, it was not again a free for all for everybody. Again, there was a condition. It was only given to property owning men. So women were totally excluded. They had no rights. And men without property also had no rights. So definitely, this is the next thing that will follow. Women and non-propertied men and women, they organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. So it is quite natural that it is not that everybody in the society will own property. That is as far as the men are concerned. And women, they comprise almost 50% of the population, which means 50% of the population has no access to voting at all. So that's why they started. So they started fighting. Now, the other demand was abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. What problems this was causing? Definitely, there were, we have discussed this in the previous session also, there were customs duties and there were different tariffs. Within the same country itself, there were different customs duties. So, the goods ultimately reaching the customer would become very costly. So definitely that would mean a loss of trade. It would mean a loss of market. So that was the demand. So whatever were state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital, and they also had restrictions on what goods can be taken from one place to the other. So this was another thing. One example here is a merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg. Both these cities are in Germany itself, or in those days in Prussia. So both these are in Germany. Now a merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg to sell his goods would have to pass through 11 custom barriers and pay a customs duty of about 5% at each of them. So how much does the whole customs duty come to? It comes to 55%, which is very, very huge. So ultimately what happens? The price of the product goes very high. And when things become unreasonably high, obviously the market for the goods will go down. So this was one thing which people opposed, removal of these internal customs duties. Now, obstacles to economic exchanges and growth were challenged by the new commercial classes who argued for creation of a unified economic territory, allowing the unhindered movement of goods, people, and capital. Dear students, now see, these were things which were there in the 19th century. But today we are in the 21st century. Even today, free trade movement, customs duty imposed by one country on the other. Even today, these issues have not been fully sorted out. Though we have the World Trade Organization, and that is now almost defunct. Every country, they want their goods to be cheaper in the country that they export it to. So it is the same kind of troubles that we have even today, but at a much lesser level. So what in the European Union, what they did was they abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from over 30 to 2. So there were too many currencies, each kingdom having its own its own currency. So exchanges were a big problem. So they removed these customs duty, internal custom duties, and they reduced the number of currencies also as because of all these agitations that were going on. Now, here, what happened during Napoleon? He not only he revolutionized France. There is no doubt he made the French nation possible, but he conquered most of Europe. And as we have discussed in the previous session, definitely people of other countries were not happy with this. They appreciated initially the changes brought about by Napoleon and his Napoleonic Code. But ultimately, in 1815, in the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon is defeated, and thereafter he is sent to exile. So, and who were the ones who defeated Napoleon? The other countries, other main European powers: Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Germany had not yet been officially been formed. That's why it is still at that point of time being called as Prussia. Now, just after Napoleon was defeated, people again came to power, but they were again not totally democratic regimes that came. It was again a regime of what is known as conservatives. Now, who is a conservative? Who is a ruler who is conservative? How do we define conservatism? People who believe in church, people who believe in the rule of the king, and who see as power being limited to a few people. These were the conservatives, basically the aristocratic class. But after 1815, when Napoleon was defeated and conservatives again came back to power, they did not take back the entire society back to the pre-revolutionary days. For example, what happened in the early 19th century and in the late 18th century, they did not go back to that. They realized that modernization could in fact strengthen traditional institutions like the monarchy. Now, though it would be a monarch from one of the ruling families, they wanted modernization to happen. Now, a modern army, an efficient bureaucracy, a dynamic economy, the abolition of feudalism and serfdom would strengthen the autocratic monarchies of Europe. But there were many other freedoms which were curbed by these people, as we will see in the coming parts. So, but they still wanted some changes which were brought about by the rise of nationalism. A good bureaucracy, a dynamic economy because of removal of customs duties, standardization of weights and measures, and also abolition of feudalism and serfdom. They didn't want that because lands in the hand of a very few people again will cause revolt. So that they thought, though they wanted a monarchy, they thought that all these things are required. So that is what they say, a new conservatism after 1815. Now in 1815, representatives of the European powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia and Australia, who had collectively defeated Napoleon, met at Vienna to draw up a settlement for Europe. Now, because he had conquered the whole of Europe at that point of time. So once he was defeated, they had to again define their territories. Now, the Bourbon dynasty, which had been deposed during the French Revolution, was restored to power. So this is why it is the ruling is still called conservative. So again, it is the royal family members who came in again, but they did not want everything to go back to pre-revolutionary days with modern methods. And whatever territories Napoleon had annexed in the other part of Europe, France lost all of it. It was only France as a country which remained. And the German Confederation of 39 states that had been set up by Napoleon was left untouched. So that part, they did not break it up further, because in 39 states itself were earlier in different areas. So he had unified that as a German Confederation, so that was left untouched. But see, this is where the problem again began. Autocratic regimes did not tolerate criticism and dissent, and sought to curb activities that questioned the legitimacy of autocratic governments. For example, there was no freedom of speech. Newspapers, anything written or anything printed, if it had to go around, it had to be censored. So that is why we will see the rise of revolution. Again, it will happen from 1830 to 1848. As we go next, we will see that. Yeah, most of them imposed censorship laws to control what was said in newspapers, books, plays, and songs, and reflected the ideas of liberty and freedom associated with the French Revolution. Because, see, the French Revolution was the torchbearer for all these in other parts of Europe. So this censorship and control by these autocratic regimes, which again came after 1815, this was criticized by the liberal nationalists. They basically did not want to settle for anything less than total democracy, wherein every citizen in the country is equal. So this was a run-up to finally for those things to happen. Now, the revolutionaries, when these autocratic regimes were there, automatically it gave rise to revolutionaries. We will see in the case of Italy, we have Giuseppe Mazzini. He is a very renowned revolutionary who fought for the freedom of Italy. So the revolutionary at this time meant a commitment to oppose monarchical forms and to fight for liberty and freedom. So people were, though administrative changes had come, though trade barriers were removed, though a common language and a common flag had started coming, they were still not satisfied because of the curbs that were there. Now, one example of a revolutionary, please note that this point will definitely be asked. You will be asked a note about Giuseppe Mazzini. So Giuseppe Mazzini, he was born in Genoa in 1807, and he became a member of the secret society of the Carbonari. Now, Genoa is in Italy. Now, he was one of the main persons who led the unification of Italy. When we see the unification of Italy in detail, we will see that also, because Italy again was divided into 7 states. So that also had to be unified. Now, Mazzini, when he began his revolution, he was sent into exile in 1831 for attempting a revolution in Liguria. Liguria again is in Italy. Now, Mazzini believed that God had intended nations to be the natural units of mankind, and because of the variations that were there in his country, he felt that so Italy had to be forged into a single unified republic. Now, he started a secret society called Young Italy. He became a member of the Carbonari, and he also started a secret society called the Young Italy. Now this, following his model of secret society, there were the same kind of societies which were set up in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Poland, because all these revolutionaries, they would be suppressed if they do it openly. So that was the reason any of these movement initially would be secret before it would come out in the open. And this coming period, 1830 to 1848, is the called as the age of the revolutions. Now, as conservative regimes tried to consolidate their power, liberalism and nationalism came to be increasingly associated with revolution in many parts of Europe, such as the Italian and German states, the provinces of the Ottoman Empire, Ireland, and Poland. Now, these countries, they wanted not just standardization of administrative reforms, but they also wanted the autocratic regime to end. They wanted freedom of speech. And even in voting, the non-propertied men and women, those kind of restrictions, they wanted it to be lifted. Now, when this again started, the first upheaval again took place in France in July 1830. So this was a comment made by Metternich. Metternich is a Austrian politician. So his comment is just given as a quote here. When France sneezes, the rest of the Europe catches cold. So anything that would happen in France immediately spread to the rest of Europe. So that was the influence of France during those times. Now here, an event that mobilized nationalist feelings among the educated elite across Europe was the Greek War of Independence. Now, Greece had been part of the Ottoman Empire since the 15th century, and their struggle for independence began in 1821, and it finally ended in 1832 with the Treaty of Constantinople. Constantinople is today's Istanbul. Constantinople was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Modern day Turkey, the capital of modern day Turkey is Istanbul, and the old name of Istanbul is Constantinople. You can please note this so that it will be easy for you to remember. Now, and when the Greeks were fighting for their independence, there were many Greeks who were in exile because they were not free to live in their own country. And also many other West Europeans, because Greek culture, they had a lot of Greek mythology, poetry, drama, and a lot of these cultural things. So that also had a lot of appreciation among people in Western Europe. All these people who lived outside, and also the Greeks in exile, they supported the nationalists, and ultimately Greek got it was identified as an independent nation in 1832. Now, here, the romantic imagination and national feeling. The development of nationalism did not come about only through wars and territorial expansions. What used to happen was, in those days, arts and drama, that is play, music, folk songs, paintings, and storytelling. These things also brought about a huge change in the thinking of the people. We have already seen how important language is there as a unifying force. Now, it was that language which was used in this. So culture played an important role in creating the idea of a nation through art and poetry, stories and music, which helped express and shape the nationalist feeling. Let us look at Romanticism, a culture movement which sought to develop a particular form of national sentiment. So, these romanticists, basically, they would look at the lighter side of the things, not as serious a view as in war, but they would look at it from a literature point of view. So, romantic artists and poets generally criticize the glorification of reason and science. Now, war again it's a war is again basically a very scientific thing. It's highly organized. So these artists and poets, they focused instead on emotions, intuition, and mystical feelings. You know, it's not just thinking from the head; it is also like thinking from the heart. So that is what these artists were doing. Romantics were influenced through folk song, folk poetry, and folk dances that highlighted the true spirit of the nation. And national feelings were kept alive through music and languages, like songs composed for the nation. Again, language as a very important tool in unifying people of a particular region. Now, one example here is of Karol Karpinski. He is a Russian. Now, he celebrated the national struggles through his operas and music, turning folk dances like the Polonaise and Mazurka into nationalist symbols. And language too played an important role in developing nationalist sentiments. After Russian occupation of Poland, Russian language was imposed everywhere. So the idea was once people start speaking the same language, then their thinking and their thoughts will all become the same. Now, but though Russian was imposed everywhere, what happened in Poland? Many members of the clergy in Poland began to use the Polish language as a weapon of national resistance. Who are the clergy? Basically, all these bishops and church priests. They were the one. Whenever they will have a mass or a religious gathering, they would use that gathering and they would preach against, say, Russia in Poland in Polish language. So that also was opposed by the regime that was in charge. For example, if Russia, it had already invaded and occupied Poland. So as a result, a large number of priests and bishops were put to jail or sent to Siberia by the Russian authorities as punishment for their refusal to preach in Russian. They used to do it on purpose, because if it was in Russian, it would easily reach the authorities. So whatever they had to speak against the administration, they were using the language of Poland, which is Polish. But language was such a powerful tool. This demonstrates that how powerful a tool it was at that point of time. Even today, language is a powerful tool in unifying people. Then the other aspect here, which we see of which common people, which say peasants, low-level workers, they underwent was hunger, hardship, and the popular revolt. The 1830s were years of great economic hardship in Europe. The first half of the 19th century, it saw an enormous increase in population. You know, things like family planning were not known at that point of time. You know, that kind of awareness was not there among people, that you have more mouths to feed, you'll need more resources. That only came in later. In most countries, there were more seekers of jobs than employment. Population from rural areas migrated to the cities to live in overcrowded slums. It was not all that organized yet. You know, the methods of construction, methods of town planning, it was just the science was just beginning at that point of time. Food shortage and widespread unemployment brought the population of Paris out on the roads in 1848. Now this Louis Philippe, who had been brought in 1815, he was forced to flee. And a National Assembly proclaimed a republic, granted suffrage to all adult males above 21 and guaranteed the right to work. Suffrage is basically the right to vote. that's what suffrage, that's what is the meaning of suffrage. It's a universal adult franchise, they say, or suffrage. Now here they had removed those restrictions on vote being possible only by propertied men. So it was, but women were still excluded. That came in later. Now, one of the instances of hardship which the people went and why the revolution was still there, as we will see again, is there's an example here. In 1845, weavers in Silesia, which is a town in Poland, they had led a revolt against contractors who supplied them raw material and gave them orders for finished textile, but drastically reduced their payments. So there was a lot of injustice happening to the weavers there. It was the contractor and the traders who were making up all the money. Now, these people, on the 4th of June in that particular year, a large crowd of weavers emerged from their homes and marched in pairs up to the mansion of their contractor, demanding wages, higher wages. Now, obviously, that man was not prepared to listen to their demands. The contractor fled with his family to a neighboring village, which, however, refused to shelter such a person. So this was a sequence of events which happened with these weaver agitation there. And he returned 24 hours later to the contractor and he requisitioned the army. In the exchange that followed, 11 weavers were shot. So any kind of uprising was also dealt with very harshly by the regimes that were there. Now, that is why this again continued 1830 to 1848. So the revolution of the liberals was, it was still continuing. Now, for the poor, unemployed and starving peasants and workers in many European countries, the year 1848, there was a revolution led by the educated middle classes was underway. Now, these educated middle classes, again I said, were industrialists, lawyers, professionals, engineers, doctors. These were the people who were inspired also by the romanticism that was there because of the folklore, because of the arts, because of the music. With all that, the revolution was being led. Now, in Germany, Italy, Poland, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which ultimately breaks up after this period, men and women of the liberal middle classes combined their demands for constitutionalism with national unification. They all demanded that a constitution be made depending on to define how the country will be run. Now they drafted a constitution for a German nation to be headed by a monarchy subject to a parliament. Now here, this Wilhelm IV, King of Prussia, when it started in Germany, the King of Russia, he rejected it. The King of Russia rejected it. And he joined other monarchs to oppose the elected assembly when the constitution was proposed. Now, with the opposition of the aristocracy, and while the opposition of the aristocracy and military became stronger, the social basis of whatever the elected assembly, the social basis of the parliament, it eroded. When we see the unification of Germany, we will see again it is from the the chief minister there who takes it up for the unification that we will see in the German unification. And again, the issue of extending political rights to women was a controversial one within the liberal movement. In those days, even women were not even given a chance to even study, to be educated in the early years. So giving political rights to them was even more controversial. So that was still there. So what the result of this was what? Women, they formed their own political associations, founded newspapers, and there's a mistake there, please read it as took part in political meetings and demonstrations. Definitely they would not keep quiet. They wanted to have a say. Even in the French parliament as well as in the German parliament, there are some pictures, even in the you can see them in the textbook. Women were admitted, but only as observers. No, they would have a visitors gallery. They were permitted only to sit in the visitors gallery. They could not come to the main floor of the house and take part in lawmaking or in administrative changes. Now, as this was happening, the monarchs who had finally taken over, they began to realize that the cycles of revolution and repression could be ended only by granting concessions to the liberal nationalist revolutionaries. They knew that because this started somewhere in the 17th century, being followed up into the 18th and the 19th century. In 17th, it began in Britain. So they knew that unless they make concessions and listen to what people are saying, they will not be able to continue in power. So in the next classes, what we will see is, we will see the making of Germany and Italy, and how Britain was different from these other nations when it came to administrative and political changes. So by this, we come to the end of this session. Any doubts, please contact us on these numbers, or you can send a message on the Button But mobile app chat section. Thank you.